In today's episode, Maru asks, I recently learned that Google Analytics poses certain privacy concerns and that other tools like Piwick are more secure. Any comments on other analytics tools other than Google? So, yes, there's more than just privacy concerns. What has happened in the EU, which, of course, is the originator of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which has been in place since 2018, but is being much more heavily enforced, is that in France and in Italy, I know for France for certain, I think Italy, the CNIL, which is one of France's major regulatory agencies, ruled that Google Analytics violates GDPR. There is no exceptions. It says because there is no way for European data to be processed only in Europe, because it is sent essentially to America, which is where Google itself is based. The use of Google Analytics, period, in the EU violates GDPR. Now, obviously, this is an ongoing court case. This ruling effectively does make the use of Google Analytics in all of the EU illegal, but I know it is being appealed and all that. So, in terms of what you need to do to comply with GDPR, is the data that you're collecting, the data that you're processing, analytics data, has to be collected, stored, and processed entirely within the EU and within the nation that you're operating, so that data for anybody within the EU, and it's, by the way, that's an important clarification, is that it is for anybody within the European Economic Area, the EU. Whether or not they're an EU citizen is irrelevant. It is if I traveled to Paris, while I was in Paris, I'm on European soil, and therefore any company tracking me would have GDPR applied to me while I am there, right? So even though I'm an American citizen, GDPR applies to me as long as I'm physically on European soil. Now, caveat and disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, right? I'm a marketer. I'm not a lawyer. So please do contact a lawyer for any actual legal disputes and things like that. But this is my understanding of the law as it stands today. So what do? You need an analytic system where the data is entirely processed within the EU. The easiest way, the best way to do this, that will pass audit, that will pass scrutiny pretty easily, is for you to run an analytics system on your servers and not send that data anywhere else, right? Don't send it to Google. Don't send it to Adobe. Don't send it to anybody. You process and run it. So that means open source analytics systems that are run on your servers by your people is the way to go. What would be some examples of that? Well, one of the systems that I recommend the most is a system called Matomo. Matomo used to be called Piwick. Matomo is the analytics system, I think, that does this the best. It is open source. It is free. You have to run the server that it runs on. If you want to be completely GDPR compliant, you have to run the server yourself. So that means you start up a server, and it doesn't have to be a physical server. It could be a VPS, a virtual server, but it has to be with a European hosting company that can certify that that server is within the boundaries of the EU. And then you install the Matomo software on your website, and then Matomo has its own tag manager, so you don't necessarily need to use anyone else's tag manager, and it's probably better if you don't, again, because the whole point is to try to avoid triggering GDPR. And then you put the tracking snippet and stuff on your website with all the usual consent stuff, so that someone who comes to your website, they get that lovely pop-up that says, hey, do you consent to being tracked? If so, then it can fire the Matomo tracking bug, and that in turn can pass that data to Matomo on your servers and compliant with the EU. I would say any analytics software, to be sure that you are compliant, should be something that you run on your servers, on servers that you own and are under your control. I would be very hesitant to use any kind of SaaS service, honestly, software as a service, because unless it's a company that's completely wholly based within the EU, has an EU-only data center and nothing else, you can't be sure that there isn't one or more pieces of that technology stack that could be running outside the EU. It could be the CDN, the content delivery network. It could be the proxying. It could be the load balancers. There's any number of technology pieces where the data could be technically in violation of GDPR. So the only way to be sure is for you to run analytics software on your servers. I know CNIL has certified that Matomo, when it is set up properly and self-hosted, is fully compliant with GDPR. They actually have a list on their website of analytics packages that are certified compliant. I happen to think Matomo is probably the best of the lot. And of course, you will pay more in terms of labor to have somebody maintain that server, because you need to understand how to run a Linux server. But it is the best possible protection against a lawsuit, against any kind of having to prove in a court that you've protected users' data in accordance with the law. So that's my suggestion. As time goes on, we are going to see more and more of these privacy restrictions, right? We're going to see more and more cookieless stuff, all kinds of things that are going to be happening. So the sooner that you get set up with a system like Matomo, the better off you're probably going to be. Another piece of software that I use is my marketing automation system. I use a system called Mautic. Again, open source software. I run it on my servers, on the server I administer. The data never leaves my control. No third party looks at that data, right? No third party is processing it. No third party is storing it. It's entirely on one of my servers. Again, from a compliance perspective, if I have to pull out server logs to prove something in a court of law, I can do that. If you're within the EU and you want to use marketing automation, or you want to use a CRM, you're going to have to start looking at these self-hosted options with hardware and software that is under your control and that will pass muster in a court of law. So really good question, really important question. This is stuff that we all have to be thinking about, because as privacy laws continue to get more stringent, everyone is going to be tackling these questions in the next few years. Here in the United States, where I'm based, we have this whole patchwork quilt of regulations. California's got its own privacy regulations. Virginia has its own. New York State has its own. And they're varying different flavors. But right now, GDPR is probably the gold standard to meet, so that if you are fully compliant with GDPR, you are almost certainly compliant with lesser privacy regulations for the most part. So make sure in terms of how you're approaching measurement, this is the way to go. The GDPR compliance means, for the most part, compliance with every other privacy regulation out there. So really good question. Thanks for asking. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.